Greetings everybody and welcome back to the channel. In today's video we're going to discuss two articles. The first one comes from Euronews and it's about what happened on Saturday in Hungary. And the second article, it's from Sputnik and it talks about a deal between Russia and India. So what we're going to do first is go into the Euronews article. I'm going to read just a few paragraphs and then I'm going to give you guys my thoughts. So, Euronews. A crowd of tens of thousands gathered in Hungary's capital on Saturday in a show of strength behind Prime Minister Viktor Orban a week ahead of the European Parliament elections. Many of the marchers felt that the stakes in next week's European Parliament elections will be higher than ever. And this is a quote now, "The whole world is dancing on a razor's edge, war could break out at any moment. Everyone must speak up and stand for peace," said one demonstrator. So, what I want to say so far is the people in Hungary clearly support Viktor Orban. And it's not just because of this demonstration. I mean, I think his approval rating is close to 55–60%. That is huge. That is a lot. You see, in the West, we tend to forget one thing. When there's elections in a country, let's say Poland, Hungary, whichever, the point of that election is for the population to choose the person or the party or whatever entity who will represent their best interest. That's it. No more, no less. I don't think anybody goes and votes based on people from another country's interest. I don't think that happens. If it does happen, then it's absolute craziness. But anyway, let's carry on with the article. Orban supporters marched along the Danube River in Budapest from the city's iconic chain bridge onto Margaret Island, waving flags and signs reading "No War." Well, clearly, just like every other population in Europe, they've had enough of the war. Orban is the longest-serving leader in the European Union, having been in power for the last 14 years. He has focused his campaign for the European elections on the war in Ukraine. Now, what I'm going to show you now, it has nothing to do with the Euronews article, but is from an article published on April 19th in the Associated Press. It's basically a quote from Viktor Orban. "They see the war as their own war, and they fight it as if it's their own war," Orban said of EU leaders. And now what the Associated Press does? Well, they add just one sentence there to contradict Viktor Orban, and they say, "No EU country has engaged its soldiers in the war in Ukraine." Well, no, but we have engaged pretty much everything else. We have mobilized every single institution, we have depleted our stocks of shells, of weapons, of air defense systems. We have given everything we could have given to the Ukrainians, except for boots on the ground. But they still think it's important for us to make that distinction in order to contradict what Viktor Orban is saying. This is the kind of journalism we get these days. "The leadership in Brussels has to go," Orban said. "It does not deserve another chance. There must be change in Brussels." Well, prove him wrong. I think he's 100% correct. This so-called leadership has brought us nothing but pain to pretty much all of us. So of course Viktor Orban is basing his campaign on the war in Ukraine. It's not necessarily the war in Ukraine, but it's about a better life for the European citizens. That's his message, and I hope people understand that. But yeah, before I get my blood boiling even more, I want to jump back to the second article, the Sputnik one, where they talk about India-Russia deal for oil. So, it goes like this. On Wednesday, it was reported that India's largest private corporation, Reliance Industries, and the Russian energy company Rosneft signed a one-year agreement for up to 3 million barrels of oil per month that will be paid in Russian rubles, putting another nail in the coffin for the US dollar's hegemony. The transactions will be handled by India's HDFC Bank and Russia's Gazprom Bank, outside of the Western SWIFT payment system, and immune to the illegal unilateral sanctions placed on Russia by the West. So, what we need to take away from this is a couple of things. The value of this deal is roughly at around 2.5 to 3 billion US dollars. It's about 3 million barrels of oil per month. And that's what it really amounts to over the course of a year. The second thing we need to take away from this is that they're doing this deal outside of the SWIFT payment system, outside of the US dollar, which is a huge deal. Now, it's not the first time it happens, nor will it be the last time, but just the simple fact that these days, these things are commonplace. It's a huge change from what we've had 10, 20, 30, 40 years ago, when no one dared to go outside of the US dollar, no one dared to speak up against the United States. But when I say to speak up, I mean speak up with their wallets. But nowadays, it's fairly common for Indians, for example, to buy Russian gas in rubles. Of course, the Americans will go mad on this, but it is what it is. Ultimately, when the collective West decided to disconnect Russia from SWIFT, we had to know there would be repercussions. If somebody says, well, I didn't see that coming, then to that I say you're an absolute incompetent and you shouldn't be leading anything. You shouldn't be in charge even of the ice cream truck. How come we haven't anticipated this? It was clear as daylight the minute you disconnect Russia from SWIFT. They're not just going to roll over and go away. They're going to try and do their best to survive, to carry on, to maintain and increase their standard of living. Ultimately, they're part of BRICS. People tend to forget that. BRICS, as an entity, is just as strong as the G7, if not stronger. But we forget that. We think the world begins and ends with the G7. If the G7 says something, then it must be true, and no one can say anything against it. This is complete nonsense. The world has changed. Or shall I say, we have changed the world by pushing every single country to the limit, or to the point where they had to look at alternatives. Speaking of alternatives, let's just look at, for example, Hungary, right? Hungary, if it needed a loan, a financial loan, in order to build, I don't know, whatever, part of the infrastructure, 10, 20 years ago, there was really only one option, or even further back. And that option was the G7. Go to the G7, sit down, have a conversation, let them know what you want to build, what you need the money for, how you're going to repay it, all of that. They will set you up with a plan, and boom, Bob's your uncle. Problem solved. The problem was, though, because there was only one entity, really, who could loan you money, you pretty much had to agree with whatever terms were put in front of you. These days, though, there is an alternative, and it's called BRICS. Today, you can do the same thing, go to the US or to any other G7 country and have the conversation, but if you're not happy with the terms they provide, you can simply go back to BRICS, say to China, because they're the strongest economy by far in BRICS, and say, right, you know what? This is the offer I've got from Germany. You make me a better offer. And China will make them a better offer 100% of the time. The reason is because they can afford it and because they want to get new business on their side. It's as simple as that. And because of that, the collective West will continue to lose clout every single time. Every single year, the dollar will slowly, the Russians are saying that the dollar is rapidly losing power. I don't think it's that rapid, though. I think it's gradual, but I think they're 100% right. It is changing. I think it's just not as quick as the Russians want us to think. But the world is changing, make no mistake. If I was to put it in very simple terms, say 1950s, 1960s, if you were in the middle of the map, in the middle of the globe, and you would look east, look west, you would clearly see that the West was the future. The West had better infrastructure, more money, more ideas, it was more creative, more lucrative. It was simply better from an economical standpoint. And not just economic standpoint. The West was better in pretty much every regard compared to the East. It was more developed, and it was clear as daylight that they're going to enjoy a few decades of huge prosperity, which we did. The problem is, if we apply the same scenario today, say go in the middle of the globe, look left, look right, if I look towards the West, it doesn't look as clean as it probably did 50, 60 years ago. I mean, I wasn't alive back then. But I don't need to be alive to just look back in history and see how things were. Today, the East looks just as good of an option. And if we continue down this trajectory, the East will look like a far better option in 10 years from now. Anyway, guys, these were my thoughts on these two matters. I have a lot more to say, but I don't want to keep the video too long, and I don't want to get my blood boiling too hot either. I'll see you shortly in my next video. Until then, stay strong, stay safe, and I'll see you down in the comment section. Take care, and bye-bye.